Right. Well, Morena, good morning, everybody. Welcome one and all to our workshop and briefing day of July. We're a little bit skinny on numbers in the chamber today, but nevertheless, we shall press on with our, I think, a reasonably interesting agenda in terms of workshops, actually. So, look, without any further ado, I shall invite Haven and our friends from the Waikato Regional Council, Lisa Armstrong and Whitney Mills, to take a seat at the front there, and they are here to talk to us today about the Waikato Regional Climate Change Hazards and Risks issues. So good morning, Morena, nice to see you in the chamber.
Good morning, thank you, Ms. Seaton. Good morning, councillors. I'll just quickly introduce Whitney and Lisa from WRC, noting that we do have Monty overseas as chair of the Sustainability and Climate Change Committee. So they are here to present the Waikato Regional Council Climate Change Hazards and Risk Report. So it's a piece of work that's been in the making for a few years, and they've been going around giving an overview of the work, letting all the stakeholders know where it's at, and we are lucky enough to have them come and share it with us. And also just quickly noting that we're lucky to have Whitney because she's about to move overseas to Australia, and I'm sure her skill set will come in handy there as well.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou, and many thanks for this opportunity to present to you this morning about our very recently published report on Waikato Region's climate change hazards and risks. And I'm Lisa Armstrong, and I'm the project manager for this project and a co-author of the report. And I'm joined by Whitney Mills, the Regional Council's Senior Hazards Advisor and lead author of the report. Are we able to just have the presentation up? Wonderful, thank you. So in this presentation, we'll give you a quick tour of some of the key information in the report and how you may be able to use it in your work in local government. We haven't got a lot of time today, but we'd welcome questions, and we'll also hopefully have time at the end to also take questions. So next slide, please.
Awesome.
Oh, we control that. Fabulous. Mine isn't moving on. So probably, I guess, one of the key things to note is that none of the climate change hazards identified for the region and the districts will come as any great surprise. However, what we see as the value of the report is that it brings together into one single location valuable insights into the hazards and risks associated with climate change that are likely to affect the Waikato. Are you doing a next slide? Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, so just in terms of what we have produced, we've got a very detailed risks spreadsheet that captures a whole heap of information around the risks in the region, and I'll talk a bit about how we collated those shortly. We've got the main technical report, and then we've also got a summary report that we've produced that we hope will be, I guess, a bit more digestible for a wider range of stakeholders. Next slide, thanks, Whitney. So before we get into what's actually in the report, we wanted to begin with a quick overview about how the report was developed. So the first phase of this work was completed in 2022, and we compiled a set of risks through workshops and hui with stakeholders, iwi partners, a regional survey, and a desktop review of existing information and literature available. And so the output of that was the risk workbook that was used to inform this report. And I've got a computer screen up there on the slideshow because it was still sort of in the throes of the tail end of COVID, and so we unfortunately had to hold all of our workshops online. In 2023, we paused work on this report because of the North Island weather events and the impact of that on our resourcing. And so the irony is not really lost on us that we had to have this delay due to hazards probably exacerbated through climate change. So then when we began work again in 2024, we re-looked at how we wanted to, I guess, shape the report and the information that we'd gathered. And it also coincided with the release of the Ministry for the Environment downscaled climate change projections, which we were able to incorporate into our work. So we also collaborated over 24 and 25 with some key stakeholder groups such as the Waikato Lifelines Utility Group and their current resilience project work to help understand climate change risk to critical infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned, to communicate our findings, we created the technical report and then also the summary report. And we would like to, I guess, take the opportunity to acknowledge the contribution and support from a range of staff and stakeholders from across this region as the work progressed at different stages. And so many local governments staff were involved and participated in the risk identification survey and workshops in 2022. And more recently, climate change and sustainability staff from a number of Waikato territorial authorities have provided feedback and input into shaping the report. I'll hand over to Whitney now, who will cover what's actually in the report itself, and then we'll talk a bit more at the end about how the report might be able to be used.
Awesome, thank you. The first thing I would like to say is that this report isn't just Waikato Regional Council's view on climate change hazard and risks for the region. It's a regional understanding of the climate change hazards and particularly the risks and the consequences of climate change. So it pulls together all of our TA's knowledge, all of our civil defences knowledge, our local iwi and hapus and communities. So even though we were leading this report, it is a regional report and a regional resource for the whole region. But there's a couple of key sections and a couple of key things which I will touch on today. So the report's broken into kind of 5 key sections. So we look into all of our current understanding of climate change projections across the region and where we are seeing some of those projections and hazards being increased by our projections. So we explore some of those. We then break it down per district. We wanted to make this report as easy as possible for our districts to look at the report and understand, well, what are the key hazards and the risks for you in particular. So we have broken it down and provided district hazard and risk summaries. We've then undertaken a high-level exposure assessment by district again to understand how our hazards and the impact of our hazards, the impact of climate hazards are varying across the region by district to district. We've then also provided some information, worked really closely with our local iwi, hapu and marae to understand what are the impacts to those communities. And then we get into the good stuff, which is actually talking about the risks. And well, it's not good stuff, but it's the juicy stuff of the report. What is this report actually telling us? I did just want to touch on first, before we do get into the report, the different ways in which we can undertake a climate change risk assessment. So these can be done with different methodologies and at different scales, and depending on the scale or the methodology that you are undertaking a risk assessment at, there's lots of different information that feeds into it and also who could lead those. So we have the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, which was produced in 2019, which looked at nationally what are our critical risks for the country. And then we've used that information to help us understand at a regional level what are those risks, which this report is focused at. This can then feed into district risk assessment. So I know Waipa has one of their priorities of understanding your climate risks. So this report can be used to help understand what are some of those key risks or impacts that Waipa could then focus on. And then you go right down into community risk assessments and or organisational risk assessments. So at WRC, we work with our TAs during adaptation projects to understand more those community risks, and we're currently doing some with the Hauraki District Council on understanding those risks to the Hauraki Plains. But when Waipa gets to a stage in which they are wanting to understand those risks at a community level, Regional Council was there to support you. But if we there's two types of risk assessments that we can do. We can do a qualitative risk assessment, which is where it's more high level, it's informed by expert opinion, people's lived experiences, and typically region-wide, really high-level modelling. And we use descriptive words to understand what those risks are. So like it's a high risk or it's a low risk. Versus if we go further down that cycle, we can get into more detailed risk assessments where we use real local specific information, and it's primarily data driven. So this is where we can actually look at the vulnerability and we say, you know, there is a high level of vulnerability and X amount of properties in a particular community is impacted to a certain degree. So there's different varying scales of a risk assessment. But this one here, it is a qualitative regional risk assessment, so it is quite high level. So if we look at our climate projections across the region, we've used quite a few different sources of information to help us understand these. So the first one is the Ministry for the Environment's latest downscaled socioeconomic SSP information. And then we have also used New Zealand sea rise, which isn't relevant for Waipa, but for our coastal districts, and also for our coastal districts, some of our recent tide gauge analysis, which is looking across the region how our tides are changing and how our coastal levels are changing. So in the report, there's three main tables. There's a temperature increase in drought, rainfall, and severe flooding, relevant for you, and then also the coastal hazards and sea level rise. But I'll jump onto some of the next slides because they're more helpful. So this is what they look like in the report. So this is looking at, in the report, it's looking at the average across the whole of the Waikato region. So for here, average temperatures, we're seeing currently as our baseline from 95 to 2014, the region has an average temperature of about 8 to 10 degrees. But if we're looking out to mid-century, we could see around 1 degree to 1.5 degrees of warming. Or if we're looking at the end of century, we could see about 2 to 3 degrees of warming. But this is an average across the whole entire region. But I have done some recent stats for you today, and I've actually pulled up Waipa's specific climate change projections. And this does include all of the SSP ranges from 2 to 4.5, 3 to 7, and the 5 to 8.5, which we are in the process of updating the report on. And you can see some of these average climate projections for the Waipa specifically. So for temperature, your average temperature in a baseline is 10.2 degrees, whereas by mid-century, you could see 1 to 1.5, and then for end of century, 2 to potentially 3.9 degrees of warming. But remember, this is an average for the district as well. But I just thought that would be useful to help pull up some of those projections and which are likely to happen. But remember, these are projections. It doesn't mean it necessarily will happen, but it's a projection. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to know for the hot days, what's the definition of a hot day? I see you've just got there more than 25 degrees. Are there any other aspects of heat that are covered by that, just simply the temperature? So
there's in the MFE's dashboard there that you can go into. I've only pulled out a few. You can go into the dashboard and there's hot days there of more than 25 degrees. There's very hot days of more than 30 degrees. And there's a couple of other climate variables in which you're able to look into and explore.
Thanks, because sometimes the humidity along with the heat can make a big difference.
Yeah, I was just going to add that when you're actually thinking about then the impacts and consequences of those hot days, there's, a range of variables you need to sort of consider together.
Yeah, I chose that because the forecast increases in the number of days is actually pretty significant. Yeah, thanks.
But yes, you can go on to that dashboard, and there's a dashboard pulling up the statistics, but then there's also the map version. So you can pick between all the different projections and actually zoom into Waipa district and see, even at a district level, how those projections are varying across the district as well.
And I think it goes down to actually 5 kilometre
grids. 5 kilometre grids.
Yeah,
so they've
really
modelled,
detailed.
They've modelled the whole country to 5 kilometre grids for all these projections. So it's a fantastic resource. And we were waiting a long time for this information to come out. Just a note, if you do go onto the website, 8.5 currently isn't provided on the website, because there was a little bit of a process where they had some of the information, but not quite the 8.5 ready. So they released some of the projections and they're just in the process of updating that. But councils can download that information into their GIS systems, which we have done, which I've been able to pull out these stats for. So as I mentioned, we wanted to understand from a regional perspective how the presence and intensity of climate change hazards varies across the region. So from a regional perspective, we know that some districts have a higher exposure to certain hazards than other districts just because of natural processes. So as you can see here, a lot of our northern districts, such as Thames, Coromandel, Hauraki and Waikato districts, they have a high exposure to quite a few of these climate hazards and climate drivers. So if there's 3 ticks, it means that there's a large exposure of that particular hazard for that district, and therefore the impact is likely to be significant for the district. Right down to 1 tick where there's a limited presence and exposure of that hazard, and therefore the impacts aren't likely to be as bad. So if we look at Waipa, you haven't got any 3 ticks. You've got quite a few 2s and some 1s. But I just want to point out here that this doesn't mean for Waipa communities that when a flooding event or when temperature increase or when a drought is occurring, it doesn't mean that the impacts of that isn't significant compared to other districts. It just means from a regional perspective, there's other districts that have a higher risk compared to you. But I did say to Haven, this might be a useful exercise to do for your community. So looking community to community and doing a similar exercise to see how your communities vary across the district as well. And then we've created these cool little maps in which we work quite closely with Haven on to try to bring together into one spot an overview of where those hazards are occurring across your district and some of those key risks in which this process has identified. These aren't expected to show every single hazard occurring in every single location and all of the risks that were identified throughout this project. It's more providing a high-level overview, and we've pulled out the key risks in which we and Haven believe that the district is experiencing now or likely to experience in the future. I will just jump forward so that you can see a bit better. So these are some of the summaries of those risks for the district. So some of those key ones in which we have found is increased temperature and the impact on your community's health, whether that's physical health or mental well-being, the impact on drought in your agricultural sector, whether that's economic or health-wise or animal-wise. There's also the impact to built infrastructure, particularly if we do have communities or development and homes in more flood-prone locations, and also the impact on Waipa's biodiversity. So we have all these Great Lakes around the district, and the increased temperature and sediment runoff and increased erosion having impacts on those. But the key thing to note here is thinking outside of Waipa as well, and that Waipa's well-being is impacted by the rest of the region and also nationally, especially when we're thinking about the indirect impacts. So things that aren't specifically happening in Waipa, but you are influenced by what is happening elsewhere as well.
Quick question on that. So I know this is climate change hazards and risks, and you want to think outside the box. But what about like our natural things like, earthquakes and volcanoes and stuff like that? Because if we have a earthquake going, like maybe the dams break and then there's flooding everywhere, like how does that, I know that's more civil defence, but does that somehow tie into looking at this as well as a risk, or not really?
So the specific physical impacts from like an earthquake or a volcanic hasn't been included in this, because this, as you say, is just purely focused on climate hazards and risks. But lots of work that we do in our team from a regional level, particularly working with Dave and Kathy here at Waipa, is that kind of broader understanding of it. And one project that you may be interested is the Hikarangi subduction zone risk assessment that we've been undertaking at a regional level with civil defence, is understanding what are the risks across the whole region for if and when Hikarangi subduction zone goes off. So we've worked really closely with Civil Defence on this to try to pull together all of those. But yeah, the scope of this was primarily focused on climate hazards, but heaps of work going on in those spaces as well. Yeah. And then this was just that map that's attached, just a bit of a higher view for you. Yeah, as I said, it might not show all of the location that those hazards are located, but I just wanted to pull out some of those key areas in which, from a regional and from Haven's perspective, we know that these hazards are either occurring now or likely to occur in the future. So on the eastern side, we have the higher country, so more landslide and soil erosion, versus down along the Waipa rivers, and we have more of those flooding risks. And then we get into the good stuff, which is actually you're talking about the risks. So we've taken these different risk domains to align with the National Climate Change Risk Assessment because our information was always intended to feed into the next round of the National Climate Change Risk Assessment update, which is currently taking place right now. So we fed this information in at the start of this year, I believe, as an evidence source for the Climate Change Commission. And we've broken these risks down into direct risks, so where there is a physical impact from that climate hazard on something, or an indirect risk, whereas more a cascading or interconnected risk. And I will, I don't expect you to read all this information because there's a lot on there, but I just wanted to show how they look in the report. And you can probably see there we've kind of highlighted or bolded, particularly on the right-hand side, geographical examples of where our stakeholders and districts and where we know these risks are either currently occurring now or into the future. So you can see Waipa's bolded there with increased risk to fire weather alongside drought and dryness, heat stress, and inland river flooding for our agricultural domain. So we've broken these risks down into different sectors within the economic domain. So this is the agricultural and lifestyle sector, or there's a tourism sector as well, just as examples. Yeah.
Yeah, could I just ask about the absence of like pest plants or new diseases that are able to establish here because of the change, you know, in the climate? Like I think I read yesterday that there's a new venomous spider.
Yeah, I
that's
saw
making its
that
way
one.
here. Yeah, and you know, like some of the things for agriculture is that some types of grasses may or may not grow, and like actually in our river, you know, we've got those clams, which might be an indication that the water temperatures increase, stuff like that. So have you been able to take that into account?
Yes, yeah. So this is just one tiny little snippet. There's like 30 pages in the report of all of these risks. So if you do want to specifically look into have we got that specific risk, we can go into that detailed Excel spreadsheet. But I do know that we have identified you know, invasive species and temperature rise and those impacts. Whether we have specifically identified Waipa as a key risk, I'm not too sure. But we do acknowledge that we might not have captured every single thing for the region, and that there's things that we know that we've potentially missed, or things that we don't know that we have missed. But it's a great starting place for Waipa to pick up and go, what have we missed and what else can we look into?
Quick question. I noticed with the wildfires there, which is quite interesting, but you haven't mentioned anything about peat fires or anything like that. And since Waipa has a lot of peat lakes and peat material, does that get captured under wildfires?
Yes, so peat fire risk is included in the report and is included as a summary and as a key risk. Yeah, and Waipa is, I believe, from memory, we have ticked, yes, this is a Waipa risk. Yeah. This is just another example for the terrestrial environment, particularly pulling up some of your key lakes. As I said, these are just summaries. This doesn't cover everything, but you can look in the detailed Excel spreadsheet to see if we have. There's your pests and disease. Warmer and wetter conditions can encourage migration of pests and diseases impacting biodiversity and human health. So there we go. And then we, as well as the physical risks and the indirect risks, that we have explored the topic of cascading and interconnected risks. So this is just an example here, and I find it quite a useful example because we all experience this, but particularly during Cyclone Gabriel and from Auckland anniversary events where flooding resulted in damage to our horticultural crops and also roading infrastructure was damaged. That's a physical risk from rainfall and flooding on the agricultural sector and our roading infrastructure. The cascading impact of that is the inability of our farmers to grow crops due to too much water or the damage on their land, and also transporting those goods, if there are goods from those farms to the supermarkets. We can't because our infrastructure is damaged, and then the reduction of product in our supermarket. So what happens? The price goes up, and then even though those some of those impacts may have been in Hawke's Bay, all across the country felt those impacts because the price of food went up everywhere. There's also that financial and mental strain on those farmers because they're not able to produce income. There's the other impact of just increased prices at the supermarket. And then those long-term cascading impacts of what we're in now, the cost of living increases. So that's just an example of some of those cascading and interconnective risks that might not be specifically happening in Waipa, but has a consequence on our communities as well. And this is where this report and also the National Climate Change Risk Assessment Report is really helpful to understand what's happening outside of your district that we need to be cognizant of as well.
Yeah, can I just add sort of something here? And it's more a kind of generic observation, I guess, as a farmer myself. Knowledge and understanding of food chain and food production is really critical. And I think it's as a general community, we've become less and less aware of the critical linkages in that food chain. And so I'm really heartened to see that this is something that's, albeit in a rather challenging sort of environment, being understood and explained and assessed and analysed. I think certainly under lockdown, I think was an opportunity for people to realise, oh, hang on a minute, that there's actually a process here that, you know, we saw a lot of those crops not being able to be harvested, you know, and subsequently, as you say, peaks of prices at the supermarket that hit everybody in the wallet. So look, I'm heartened to see that there's sort of it's being daylighted, if you like, because I think people tend to think that food just appears at a supermarket.
Yeah, exactly.
And as a food producer, I'm pleased to see that there's a light being shone on the criticality of that chain.
Awesome. Yeah, and in the report, we have also touched on, well, this may cause people to want to grow their food at home, but if we're having increased temperature, are we able to grow food? Because if we have increased temperature, we need more water. But if we're in an area where, for the Hauraki Plains, where they're already, they're already oversubscribed in the Piako water system, they might not be able to get more water. So those are the long-term cascading impacts and risks that we've tried to capture from a regional level. And we do know in the next round of the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, they are focusing more, or they are looking deeper into the interconnectedness and cascading and transitional risks, which climate change is bringing to light. That's enough from me. I'll hand back to Lisa.
Before we talk a bit more about how you might be able to use the report in your council, we wanted to share a statement from a workshop that Whitney and I attended recently, which is tomorrow's risk is built today. And I think it's a really sort of key message to keep at the front of your minds going forward. And as you're, thinking about your next LTP, all of, what should we be doing? And so I just want to click again, Whitney. Yeah, so I mean, as local government, particularly in our local communities, you're ideally placed to address, the risk for the future. And so, and really now is the time that we need to be thinking about that long-term well-being in our districts and regions. And, there are plenty of ways that we can actually do that without, national level, legislation. So we can, as local government, we can control land use and land zoning through our districts and regional planning functions. We can require the planting of large trees for shade in urban areas. And when we're doing our own council-led urban development projects, we can make sure we're planting large trees to help manage heat risk in urban areas. we can make sure we're creating sponge cities and towns to help with extreme rainfall events so that, we don't have lots of hard surfaces. And so those are just a few examples about our ability as local government today to reduce tomorrow's risk. So, we're moving in the right direction, but it does actually require change to embed new ways of thinking. And sometimes, to be honest, there'll be hard conversations. And Whitney, you might want to add something about just sort of some of the consenting.
Yeah, so from a regional level, we are seeing quite a few consents coming through for development and some maybe not so appropriate land coming through. This is all across the region. So it's thinking about, are we developing robust information to help us understand what land is appropriate to be built on? And we've been working with Robin Walker in-house here for your urban modelling that is coming through, and currently working with some of the consenting people about some possible development in and around Te Awamutu, in which we need to think, is that actually an appropriate location to be putting people in? And it is quite ironic today that our team leader and Rick Cleefting, our team leader in the team, he's actually up in Auckland, being called to evidence for the coroner's inquiry into the Auckland anniversary events. So we did unfortunately have one person in the region pass away during the Auckland anniversary events, but that he passed away from a decision of him wanting to enter floodwater. So it wasn't being built in an inappropriate land or an appropriate spot, but it does raise, the bigger question of, should we be building in floodplain locations? And if we are, making sure that we're building those developments to an acceptable level of risk, because as soon as the council zone a piece of land for development, you're putting your precedent out there to your community that people can live there. And things may have been zoned 10 plus years ago, and our knowledge of natural hazards was a lot less compared to what we know now. So even if it's zoned, we still need to be thinking of, with our current knowledge and information that we do know now, should that still be a location in which people could be living in? I know that's a very big, complicated conversation, but yeah, as it is, tomorrow's risk is built today, and we can reduce that risk now. But we're making big steps, particularly at the national level, with the new LIM regulations that come into effect 1st of July, and Regional Council providing or being required to provide information to district councils to put on LIMs, and also hopefully the national policy statement on natural hazard decision making coming in soon. So yeah, those are just some of the key things I wanted to touch on there.
So, I mean, the report is at regional scale, and it's setting out, I guess, what the risks are and what the hazards are. But we wanted to really also just touch on how the report might be able to be used by any number of partners and stakeholders in the region. I guess recognising that we all have very different roles and responsibilities under a range of legislation. So how everyone uses the report will be different. But I guess the one thing is that is in common for everyone and in their businesses and legislative functions, is that we need to be proactively and intentionally considering climate change risks in all of our work and planning. It needs to be really embedded. So some of the ways it can be used is to help inform future work programs and research programs, identifying where focused risk management and further detailed risk assessment is required. So Whitney touched on earlier about the different scales of risk assessment. So, the national, with the work we've done sitting at regional scale. And I know, Haven has led work on your own organisational climate change risk assessment. So that's a really good foundation piece of work, at an organisational level for you. It's also the report can also be used, we hope, to help communicate with communities and stakeholders about the types of hazards and risks, and also to help prioritise adaptation responses and investment. And as local government, staff and councillors in the governance space, the next LTP process is going to be here before we know it. So now is really the time to be thinking carefully and deeply about what climate risk and adaptation planning work you'll need to do as a council. So the report includes one way to help prioritise risk, and so we've included in the report because it's a methodology that the Climate Change Commission shared with us in one of our briefings about the next National Climate Change Risk Assessment and setting out how they are planning to potentially prioritise risk. And we've included it because we think it kind of looks like quite a useful method. I mean, it's not the only way, there's heaps of different methodologies out there, but it's quite, to us, seems quite simple and, you know, looking at the risk severity and then really your readiness, whether it's in your policy or in your planning, and then that can help identify priority risks. So if you're thinking at risk severity, you're thinking about, okay, over what timeframes is that risk likely to arise? Is there, in terms of policy readiness, are there things we need to do now to actually prevent that risk arising in the future, or, you know, stopping that risk being locked in so that we actually don't have the ability to manage it? So, I mean, in one example, there's a lot more detail I should add in the technical report. So there's sort of a whole section on prompts about how to consider risk severity and policy readiness, sort of to help prompt that thinking. But one example is, you know, increasingly hot temperatures and those heat impacts. So over time, your staff and people with, you know, businesses across the region will be working outside in increasingly hot temperatures. So you can consider that risk from both a district perspective and also from an organisational perspective for your own staff. And so there's a risk to health and safety to council staff when working outside in increased heats. And so, you know, the type of thinking you might do is say, when are the risks? What are the risks around this? When will these risks likely occur? How ready are our internal policies for this eventuality? And then, you know, taking a district-wide lens, you know, you might be thinking, okay, well, what will the impact of this heat risk be on economic productivity in our region? And what action is required and when to start thinking about how you address that? So just covering some of the planned work that we as a regional council are doing in this space to, I guess, address climate change risk, you know, through our regional function. We've included some of our key pieces of work here. So if you may have read our long-term plan, you may have not, but resilience is actually a key theme in our long-term plan for this current LTP period. And so we've invested in a range of work programs to help, you know, increase resilience across the region. The program that Whitney and I are directly involved in is the understanding and adapting to natural hazard risk. But from a regional council perspective, you know, we see that planning and responding to climate change is embedded in and needs to be embedded in everything that we do. So from managing water allocation and water quality, biodiversity and biosecurity, future land use and development, and also our infrastructure capital planning. So some of those key projects that are helping manage that is our current project on regional spatial planning. So that's managing risk to future development and land use. And, you know, now we've got the RM reforms coming as well, which are actually is putting in place spatial planning. And so it's a really key tool. There's the collaborative work that we do with territorial authorities on local community adaptation projects. So that's managing risk to existing development and land use. There's our infrastructure strategy, which had a big rewrite for this current long-term plan and really clearly sets out, you know, the challenges that we're facing with our flood infrastructure in particular, in terms of its, you know, in the future climate, it may not be fit for purpose. And also then, of course, our regional water security strategy and multi-stakeholder implementation plan that work's currently underway on that with stakeholders across the region. Next slide, thanks.
Sorry, just on that. So how, so you've got your own spatial planning tools that you're using. So does that, have you looked at our spatial planning with our AHAKI plan to see how it overlays with what projects we have coming up in the future and land use and things, to see if they, like, well, you can't actually do this here in 10 years time because it's going to be flood zone and bits and pieces?
Yeah. I'm not directly involved in our regional spatial planning project, but I do know that it has been, it's a really collaborative piece of work and has been worked on, across councils. Yeah.
So just to respond to that query, Marcus, Waipa is having input into a team led by Waikato Regional Council to develop that regional spatial strategy. So yeah, we've got Katie and myself have had some input and will continue to work with that team.
And I'll just touch on here about your other question about outside climate change hazards. So the program that she mentioned, we were specific in calling it understanding and adapting to natural hazard risk, not climate risk, is because from a region, we have all these other hazards that are posing significant risk to our region, earthquakes, volcanics. We have one of the very few regions who have volcanic risk. And even though a lot of the projects right now are climate focused, there are other projects underneath the program that aren't climate specific, so that we are taking that holistic understanding to all natural hazard risk, not just climate risk.
Next slide, Whitney, thanks. So Whitney, and as I mentioned, Whitney and I sit in the regional resilience team, and we have our understanding and adapting to natural hazard risk program. So I just wanted to share some of the key projects that our team has underway at the moment. So the first of those is a program of work to improve our quantitative hazard and risk data across the region. And so that includes updated coastal inundation data and our regional flood modelling program. So all going well with our regional flood modelling program. By July 2026, we hope to have most of the region modelled to hopefully quite a useful level of detail.
And we've already done the tester for that, which includes the Waipa River. So we already have basically your whole district covered. It's the first phase for us to start working on that.
And one of the other projects that we have coming up later this year is also spatial exposure modelling. So using those two updated data sets of coastal and flood modelling. So that will help us at a regional scale understand what is exposed to, for example, flood risk and where, and when this might be likely to occur. And so, and that kind of will be really useful in that, the tomorrow's risk is built today. And so, building that knowledge base so that we can all make really good decisions, for the future. So the second piece of work is a regional resilience strategy and plan, which is a 3-year project in our current long-term plan. So this report, together with the strategy and plan, we see key vehicles for a regional conversation on climate adaptation, and then agreeing and funding priority regional actions and information needs. So we plan to begin talking to stakeholders and partners about this work in the second half of this year. So that really concludes our presentation. So if anyone has any questions, we're very happy to take them.
Any questions? These good people. Mike and then Bruce.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple. So the reports, obviously you're giving it to the TAs at the moment. But one of those slides there was a lot that would have affected emergency services in terms of knowledge of this report. So just my first question is, how is that going to be pushed out to them? Because obviously change is probably going to come through them through this.
Yeah, so you're thinking AMBO and police
Fire,
and FENS and
yeah.
So as Lisa mentioned, one of the key stakeholder groups we work with was the Waikato Lifelines Utility Group. So through the Waikato Civil Defence Group, we've reached out into all of those emergency services group. So we did have feedback into this when we were collating the information from like FENS and police and co. And we've pushed this report out through those civil defence channels to try to get into them as well.
Right, good. So that'll get down to the local station,
Hopefully, I mean we've tried to push it out to our current avenues that we know of.
Right.
Whether it's gotten every specific police station and AMBO centre, I'm not too sure at that specific level. But we've tried to include those avenues in our comms and engagement.
Yeah, because I mean a lot of those particularly FEN stuff. A lot of it's volunteer stuff. So I guess if they can see into the future, it's about that reducing the risk today sort of thing. And the other one is with the potential of CCOs being set up around the country and around sort of Waikato. You'll obviously be working with the new governance structures that may come in place there, because a lot of this infrastructure is going to possibly, if this happens, sit outside council. So just your thoughts on that?
Touch on that or?
Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, the risks, whether, you know, the physical risks to a piece of infrastructure is going to be the same no matter who owns or who owns that risk. It's how they're going to manage that when they come into it. And that's leading on from this report. It's that conversation and understanding of how people manage that. But this report's just highlighted what are those impacts and what are those risks to that infrastructure.
Yeah.
Oh,
I guess my point is more just making sure that it's front and centre for those potential new organisations.
just drawing, I actually was involved in setting up quite a few council-controlled organisations at Manukau City Council many years ago. I guess one of the ways that you could potentially help manage that and ensure that that's addressed in front of centre is actually perhaps in your statement of intent, you know, that you set for your CCO, that you actually, you know, make it really clear that climate risk is to be addressed. I mean, hopefully any good, you know, whoever's leading and governing that those entities should be considering climate risk anyway. But that is one way that you could, I guess, emphasise that.
Thank you, ladies. One of your earlier slides, I was intrigued with how iwi are affected by climate change. And my question maybe is, how is that different to every other member of the community? Or are you heading in that direction with that?
Can I touch on that one?
Yeah, or me. Yeah, either.
So with your Māori or Pākehā or Chinese or whatever, everyone's impacted, you know, from climate change. So we've just tried to highlight some of those more cultural impacts that they could be experiencing, you know, like loss of their traditional land, and that's just to name one particular one.
Inability to gather mahinga kai. So I guess it's the cultural and spiritual impacts.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, ladies. I'm pretty impressed with the work that you've done. Thank you. It's going to be really valuable for us. The question I have is, you obviously aware that we do have a Sustainability and Climate Change Committee. How can we maximise your talents and expertise? Like, you're obviously gearing up to do that work to do with, you said there was
The resilience strategy.
Yeah, the resilience stuff. But is there anything else that you think that we can really leverage, you know, your assistance, your expertise to take this to the next level, that kind of thing? So interested in your, because you know, you get that broader view across the whole region, and you would see other committees working as well. And we want to certainly make the best use of you. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, you know, we're always very happy to come and present, and, you know, particularly over the next couple of years, we're going to have some really key information becoming available. And if your committee is you know, a forum that would like to receive direct updates, I think, you know, we'd be very happy to. And I should also add that, you know, there's quite a really good informal network of climate change and sustainability staff across the region that are connecting in this space. And, you know, sometimes that percolation at that informal staff level is actually really valuable, because then you're making those connections to then advise up to governors.
Yeah, and from a staff level, I mean, we would love to be able to help at a technical, really getting down into the details, help, you know, like Haver when he is working on this work, but we are only a small team. We have 11 territorial authorities that we have to manage, and I am the only risk expert in Waikato Regional Council, and I'm leaving, so it doesn't really help. But that's why we're really investing on building our regional knowledge base, so undertaking this regional flood modelling and building all these strategies and plans to help set our districts up to be able to use this information as much as possible. And we're always thinking, you know, regional, but how can our districts get the most benefit out of this information? So that's why we, currently we only have some specific river modelling for very ad hoc places across the region where districts have come to us to ask for support for district planning, but we're like, no, we need to think all of our region now. So that's why we have done this, while we are working on this regional flood model where the whole district, well, the whole region will be modelled to quite a detailed level of information in which people could pick it up and use it for your district plans and consenting and subdivision. So yeah, we're trying to invest on that really region-wide information that can feed in.
Any other questions for these good ladies? No other questions. Yeah, look, fascinating piece of work. And I think Claire's sort of encapsulated in her comments at the end there in respect to it actually having potential to embed in a lot of the way that we function here as a council and make decisions. So really interesting to see it in granular detail, and I'm interested, I guess, going forward to see how Haven and his crew perhaps refine some of that risk assessment on the ground as it relates to people within Waipa. So really interesting, and thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, many thanks for the invitation and for your interest and engagement in our work. So yeah, we do hope it will be useful.
Yeah,
and please do reach out as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. And safe travels to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it was really helpful. Moving on then to our next briefing, which is our legislative update. We are tracking time-wise almost on time. Look at us. Who would have thought? Good morning, Wayne, Peter and Katie. Nice to see you all this morning. The floor is yours.
We have the presentation. Right, so I'll kick off, and Morena Tato, everybody. This workshop focuses on resource management reform and provides an update to you on the extent and nature of the proposed central government changes, particularly in relation to the national directions a package has recently received on national policy statements and national environmental standards. This is part of the Phase 2 government resource management reform process. But however, as you're aware, concurrently other legislative and regulatory reform processes are underway. And generally the nature of this presentation, this workshop, was going to focus on some of those other matters in respect to building compliance and consenting, development contributions and levies. We expect legislative updates end of the year, public health reforms of the hairdressing regulations removed, updates for hazard information. We just heard from Lisa and Whitney there from the WRC. Now more information will need to be disclosed in land information memorandums in respect to that. We also have government investment and implementation roadmap for our emergency management system improvement program to strengthen New Zealand's emergency management system with new legislation proposed at the end of the year. But for now, and for this workshop, the focus is on resource management reform, and we only have 45 minutes. It's really tight. We'll take questions at the end. Background information has been previously sent to you through On the Radar, included a high-level overview relating to the 4 packages of national directions with a link to a more detailed discussion document. So some of the background's there. So let's just get straight underway. We've got Katie here to give some high-level observations on the drivers for the new resource management system and commentary from the recent draft report on the National Infrastructural Plan from NZ Infrastructure Commission. And Peter will then take you through at a high level the various national direction packages and the key impacts on the Waipa district. So we'll go through the presentation. So over to you, Katie, in the first instance.
Morena Tato. So as Wayne says, I've just got a few slides just to put the resource management reform in context before we sort of focus on sort of the current stage. So if we move on to the next slide. There we go. Just on the slide, we've just reminded you what the objectives are of the reform overall. This has obviously been a long time in the making. The Resource Management Act was enacted in 1991. So, it's over 30 years old. And we are seeing that sort of generational change in legislation, obviously kicked off under the previous Labour-led government and now same but different under this current government. So the objectives here, I think the key things to really notice is that the Resource Management Act has been built on an effects-based system. and try to be permissive if you stayed within those environmental effects. Certainly the big shift here is that there is a shift to that sort of more development-enabled approach. And so as well as thinking about any negative environmental effects, we will need to be able to actively consider the positive outcomes of a proposed development and really consider those alongside each other. And that's a significant shift in the way of thinking. Some of what's driving this and what you'll see on the next slide is the current government's focus around the way that it is developing infrastructure and the infrastructure needs that we're seeing around the country. And the diagram on the right there shows why central government cares. They are actually delivering 44% of the infrastructure for the country. And so at the moment, they're really concerned that they're not getting value for money from its own spend. And obviously, they've been in discussion with local government about making sure that we get the best out of what we've got as well. And you'll see that when we move on to onto the next slide, please. Thanks, Zoe. About that this is in part behind the shift to more of that national direction and making sure that we don't end up with bespoke plans around and provisions around the country, so the central government can make sure that it can deliver some of that, particularly that parallel infrastructure that runs up and down the country. It's really interesting with a little factoid in there around the number of land use zones in New Zealand compared to Japan, a country of a really similar size, also a mountainous spine running down the middle. That's for me, this is a little factoid from the Infrastructure Commission and is really illustrative of just how devolved a system we have in New Zealand with so many players, and one of the ways that it just makes it more complicated for anyone to get stuff done and understand what those rules are. On the right, some facts there from 2021 about the sort of consenting becoming more complex, and you understand why. It's actually not that. It's a lot of the cost here for developers is 70% of that is being spent on consultants trying to meet information requirements and trying to feel that they need to meet the standards and what the expectations are from council. And so that's become an industry in itself, which is one of the things that this reform is trying to break. Yep, thank you. No, you're right, Zoe. I paused just through at time. If you can move on. This one here is it gives you a diagram of what the new system will look like overall. With two parallel acts, so that we do have one that's particularly focused around that planning and infrastructure, and then one about protecting the environment and how they run in parallel. And you'll see that where we get down to today we're going to focus on those the second boxes down around national policy direction, because that's what's out for review right now. And then later in the year, we'll get into the legislation that will start to set the framing for having a regional spatial plan and what is currently our district plan nested within the spatial plan. But that's to come. So if we move on to the next slide. Oh, it's Peter with the clicker, not Zoe with the clicker. I was looking at Zoe, but it's this beautiful assistant here. This slide just sets out a little bit about what we're seeing some of those likely impacts being, both for us as a council and then for our communities as well. Peter and the team are looking at the current phase of national direction and not seeing any really significant red flags. There are areas where there's some technical improvement that the staff will be submitting on to sharpen that direction, make sure it really suits our needs. And what it means for us as a council is, as third bullet point, really about the stronger national direction and the way that we need to make sure that we're providing for that in both the planning and the consenting. But none of that will require us to review the district plan immediately, and we will need to wait and see how the new system actually shakes down to see what ends up being covered in the new system and what might be remaining for the district plan review. I think that the work that we've done, the sort of points at the bottom, once the whole system's in place, is that this council's really well positioned. The spatial planning work that's gone on, the 30-year growth planning that's gone on, all of that will set us up really well for what's coming. And I think that's something that we should be proud of that way. Obviously, the intent here around sort of having that more development enabled and the lower costs will flow to us as a council as well as to our community and developers. And if the intent of the legislation's met. So at the moment, like I say, very much focused on how can we submit to and make improvements around those edges so it meets our needs. And that leads nicely to this next slide here, just to lead you in and remind you kind of where we've been and where we're going to. The work is happening at pace. There's often only one opportunity for input, and so this is it. For the areas in green that are highlighted today. The focus of today's workshop is particularly on the first two lines. You'll see there that we've got submissions closing soon. And as Peter will talk about, the Going for Housing Growth package, which will be a significant interest to the council, we do have slightly longer before submissions are due. And so that is something that the draft submission will come to the strategic planning and policy committee. I'm still learning my acronyms. On the 6th of August, so you're able to provide a bit of feedback ahead of the deadline there. But perhaps it's a good time to pause before we get into the specifics about the national direction. I know you want questions at the end, but perhaps if there's any points of clarification rather than discussion, that would be good before we get into it so people understand the context.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Claire had a
So
question.
what struck me was the national direction and in particular, like as an example, cell phone towers. So we know that a lot of these infrastructure things are changing their technologies, quite significantly. Do you know if there's going to be a requirement that the most up-to-date methodology or technology has to be adopted? So providers can't just use old technology like cell phone towers when, like satellite links are going to be all the rage, so it kind of protects the community in that at least they know the best solution, most up-to-date approach needs to be taken. So whether or not there's a requirement for that needs to be taken.
So from what I've read to date, no. Certainly the focus is on the ability to have towers and to have higher towers and with more a focus on the ability for providers to co-locate in the same area, but certainly not in terms of directing those providers to implement the most up-to-date technology.
I think it's a really good point to make and something to be reflecting in the submission. Certainly coming from a transport background, we've really seen how prescriptive transport regulation is and how it really ends up holding us back when new technology does come. So e-scooters was a really good example that actually they didn't fit anywhere, and all of a sudden you think, well, what are you supposed to do with these things? And we're going to end up with increasing technological change.
Yeah, so I'd support that being included in a submission or something. Yeah.
Great, I'll ease you in gently. And just a wee bit of an update on the most recent bill that's just completed its select committee process. So the bill has been recommended for approval to go through subject to amendment. The couple of the key amendments relevant to us are that the ability to opt out of NDRS has been removed from the bill. And instead, those matters will be dealt with in the new legislation. The second key part is that they've backtracked on changing the requirements for when hearings are held in the resource consent process. So that's a good outcome as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, just going back to that last one, is that the removal of optionality of medium density residential standards, is that where they're going to set targets for us?
Yeah, so that's
and what implication will that have? Because, again, that's that external influence coming through
Yeah.
to actually set
About- it's-
direction for us in our planning.
It's about 16 slides on.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Would you prefer we do it as a chunk and questions at the end again? Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, so just in terms of some of the terminology and some understanding of what we're talking about, the changes are directed specifically towards national policy statements and national environmental standards. The statements are basically government policy that is implemented by council, either through the district plan or via its decision-making processes and resource consents. The national environmental standards are rules that government tells us we have to administer, and they override anything that we have in our district plan. So that's quite important. There's a couple of common themes that are coming through in all of the changes. There are policies that are specific to Māori in terms of requirements to recognise and provide for Māori interests, in relation to sites of significance, engagement protocols, interests that iwi may have in being developers of infrastructure. So that's quite a big change. There's a big change in wording at the moment with our decision making. We're required to have regard to or to take into account some of the provisions. The wording now is that we must recognise and provide for. So it's very directive in terms of what we need to do. And then there's also a big focus on recognising the benefits, particularly in relation to infrastructure, and recognising that infrastructure and other, in particular, has specific operational and functional needs, which may determine where they have to locate. And if that is a location in a sensitive environment, then so be it. So what we do have is two new national policy statements. The first one relates to infrastructure. Basically, its key focus is to identify desired outcomes with respect to infrastructure, what they mean for us, how important they are, and they are to direct any decisions that we make in relation to infrastructure. There's a shift to expand on what infrastructure actually is, and that is expanding out to include social infrastructure. But it's quite a broad list of activities. And it's something that we're looking quite closely at in the submission in terms of how are these activities defined. Because the next thing is that as far as infrastructure goes, we're going to be having directives to enable it to occur and to allow it to happen. Essentially to make it easier to develop infrastructure. The second new standard relates to natural hazards, which I suppose is a wee bit of a segue from what you just had presented to you. It is to provide a consistent guide for how decisions are made on natural hazards throughout the country. There's going to be a risk-based approach, and any controls we put in place need to be proportionate to the risks that are posed by a particular hazard. We have that to a degree already in the district plan, in that, for example, we're in our flood hazard areas where there's a 1% flood hazard. If people build floor levels above that hazard level, then it's okay to occur. If they propose to build in locations where the flood hazard is more intense, say the flood depths are more than 1 metre deep, then there's a disincentive for people to look to establish. So that's sort of what a proportional response means. We first of all have to identify what the hazard risk is. And then it does provide a framework for how we define significant risks as well. We have a number of amended policy statements. The statements for Indigenous biodiversity and highly productive land are having amendments to them to make it easier to have mining and quarrying activities in significant natural areas and on highly productive land. The highly productive land statement is also being amended to remove class 3 soils from consideration. Doesn't really have that much of an impact for us. So the diagram that I show there is class 1 and 2 soils that we have. And so particularly in Cambridge, we're still surrounded by highly productive land. It makes it difficult to grow further than what we have. So that will be a little bit of a focus on the submission for us in terms of providing flexibility to enable growth to expand into class 1 and 2 areas where you haven't got any other choice.
Just on that, we just need to make sure that the housing growth package talks to this this particular one, because the housing growth package is saying things like prohibiting urban limits and district plans. But if we can't expand our town like Cambridge because it's on class 1 and 2 land, how are those two packages talking to each other, those directions? So we'll look at that closely.
The electricity transmission is expanded in scope. It's now referred to as being electricity networks. It includes, at the moment, it's pretty much confined to Transpower's transmission network. But it is expanded now to relate to the whole distribution network, so including the likes of Waipa Networks and our other providers. And it also contains specific provisions relating to electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're going to have some requirements to do consultation with the distribution authorities and to map their assets and to have provisions that protect their assets, which come through in some of the national environmental standards as well. And then the MPS for renewable electricity generation really gets an update. It was initially created, I think, in 2008 or somewhere around there. So as time moves on, the importance of electricity to us has been enhanced, and we also have emission reduction targets and legislation that we didn't previously had. So there's more of a focus towards enabling renewable electricity generation as well. Okay, we have two new national environmental standards. So the first one relates to Papakainga. This is very similar to the Plan Change 23 that we've proposed, in that it relates specifically to Māori land or ancestral land, and that on those sites up to 10 dwellings are able to be established as part of a Papakainga development as of right. Essentially the provisions are a lot more permissive than what our plan change was. As I've said before, when this standard comes into play, it will overwrite anything that we have in our district plan. And so because of that, we've made the decision to pause work on the Papakainga plan change to wait to see how this NES evolves. And if it comes out in a point where we feel that it may need to be more lenient, then we can consider reactivation of the plan change to target specific areas. But on the whole, what we were looking to achieve through the Papakainga plan change will largely be achieved through the standard. And then I think the next one is the granny flats, and I think you're all probably pretty aware of that. So each site will be able to have one unit of 70 square metres on it. It applies to all residential and rural zones. So it's not just in our medium density area, it goes beyond. There's a few things that we need to iron out with it, that we need to ask some questions on technical points. But as a whole, I think that it's a good... No, it's not. The messaging that it's going to happen is. You mean in terms of the secondary dwelling rules in the district plan? Yeah, it is in place, but a little bit different. So in some of the areas where to be able to have a secondary dwelling, it has to be attached to your existing house, for example. So those things would change. We don't know how it interacts with the medium density provisions that have 2 additional dwellings as of right at the moment. We don't know if this means that there can be a 3rd or if the granny flat is one of the 2 that's already permitted. So those are things that we need to work through. Okay, the amended NES, so we have electricity transmission. So again, we have new provisions like we talked about with the NPS that are specific to distribution and electric vehicle for charging. There's a provision for increased size and height of poles. There are new rules that will be put in play that relate to activities undertaken close to electricity assets. At the moment in the district plan, we have a series of rules about the national grid yard, about where sensitive activities can be located with respect to them and what sort of earthworks and things like that you can undertake. Those rules will now become redundant because they'll be specified in the National Environmental Standard. The telecommunications facilities provisions are amended as well, increased size and height of towers and antenna, and bringing in express provision for temporary facilities to be able to be established. So where they can bring in telecommunications masts if there's a specific event being held or if there's an emergency situation that needs to be dealt with. The provisions just allow masts to come in without reference to any rules in the district plan. And then the final one relates to the commercial forestry provisions, which relate more specifically to regional council functions. Okay, we have package 3 relates specifically to the MPS for freshwater management. This is something that is mostly the control of the regional council. We haven't done a lot of work on it yet. I don't expect that there'll be a lot of implication for us, so I'm not going to dwell really any further on it. And now, Roger, we've got to package 4. So essentially, the government is seeking feedback from us on how the new Planning Act will address their policies for freeing up more land for urban development. The package is not setting out a specific proposal that they're putting towards us. They're really just seeking input as to what do we think about these different things that they've talked about. There's a couple of interesting tidbits in there for Waipa. They're asking for discussion on should councils like Waipa continue to be targeted as being urban areas of a larger metro. Yeah, that's how we've got caught in with Hamilton at the moment as a tier 1. Yeah. It's difficult to know. I know originally there was a fair bit of opposition towards that happening. But it happened, and we've gone through the work of bringing MDRS in. I think we need to look at what the implications for council as a whole are, in making a particular position on that, because there will be benefits for remaining a tier 1 authority, and there will be downsides, and it's a matter of weighing that up. The second point is that they're asking us, should there be deferral of any requirements to do work on upgrading the future development strategies, future-proof, and for doing the housing and business analysis reports. And I think that that's probably a good idea to pause on those. It would just otherwise represent a wasted expense. And then we're coming into the measures that they're looking at to incorporate into either the legislation or the revised version of the NPS urban development, requiring us to have 30 years housing capacity zoned. Undertaking the spatial planning, which is already embedded in the legislation. It's something that's going to need to be done. It's a matter of what will they target the spatial planning that the spatial planning needs to address. Having provisions for responsive planning. So, for areas where people seek to develop land that's outside our program growth areas, as we have provision for and future-proof at the moment. It's setting thresholds for what is meant by significant development capacity that would enable that sort of out of sequence or unanticipated development to occur. Some of the thresholds that they've suggested for that look to be quite low. Talking of being developments of 50 dwellings or more as representing significant development capacity. That's really just a generous size subdivision. To me, it wouldn't represent significant development capacity such that would necessitate departure from our growth strategy. They're looking to have a prohibit on urban limits, not having an urban-rural boundary as such. At the moment in the district plan, we do identify an urban limit. That's mainly for setting the target for all the parameters for when you can or can't connect to reticulated infrastructure. It's going to be interesting to see what they actually mean by that and how it's achieved and how it relates back to the highly productive land issue. With urban intensification, in our district plan at the moment through Plan Change 26, we brought in a whole lot of qualifying matters that enable us to reduce some of the requirements. What they're sort of saying is that if you have a qualifying matter, that ultimately reduces the development capacity that you could achieve, and that they may therefore require us to offset any loss in capacity that might arise from constraint on development from those qualifying matters. So that might just be having targets elsewhere for higher density being achieved. But it's a bit difficult when our approach has been town-wide to have a constraint overlay.
If I can just jump in, this is particularly in Auckland. This is a response to Auckland, where things like the view corridors and heritage character areas have taken swathes of the inner city out of intensification. And so despite the fact that the government has spent a lot on things like the city rail link and public transport in general in the inner city, actually density has gone down in the inner city and has gone up further out despite that. And so there's real frustration from government that they've invested something where to actually get that density, put your public transport in place, but the zoning's actually undermining that investment that they've made.
We are. We've just left with the next step slide. So I think
yeah, there's a lot of questions there, isn't there?
Roger.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, sitting on a lot of these plan changes, just as an example, the last one that we've had, one of the arguments against just bringing forward that land to be industrial was actually the argument of whether or not it was highly productive land. And are they going to remove some of the previous restrictions that we had? For instance, if the land was included in Waipa 2050 as being designated future industrial, and that gave us the option or gave us the ability to use highly productive land that had been designated in that plan. Are they going to remove that?
I don't think that they will remove the ability to include areas that have been identified by a growth strategy. The key implication is if we want to add new areas.
Right.
But as part of our spatial planning, I think that the settlement pattern that has come through Future Proof and that has been adopted in the regional policy statement is pretty much is set, and there'll be no backtracking.
But if we're going to have a target that's going to be set for us to provide 30 years of capacity, and we're working up to our, particularly in Cambridge, we're working up to our urban boundary now anyway, and the only place that we can really develop outside of that urban boundary is onto basically highly productive land. So does that mean, because currently in terms of our district plan and in terms of development concepts, my perception is that we leave it pretty much up to the developer to give us a concept plan. So our district plan is not definitive in saying in that area that all must be high density housing. We leave it up to the developer in that regard. Are we going to have to be more directive in terms of having that increased density?
Yes, and to a degree we have been implementing that already with some of the draft plan changes that have been worked on from some of the cells at the moment. So we've been working with the applicants to incorporate specific provisions that relate to the achievement of density, particularly in C5 and in Leamington and T4 and TR2.
Yeah. But if the other question there is, if we're going to have to increase our future capacity for residential, where are we going to go?
Yeah, and those are the questions and issues that we need to identify through the submissions.
Yeah, that's certainly all good points, Roger, and sort of highlighted that point about the tension between high quality soils MPS and the requirement to expand the towns. I think we're in a unique position around Cambridge because a lot of our expansion of our areas is actually would be on class 1 and 2. We've been quite fortunate in having the Waipa 2050 strategy done and had identified all these growth areas that were excluded from the existing MPS high quality soils. It's what goes beyond that, as the question that you're raising is a valid point, and we need to make that point quite absolute that, look, we don't have alternatives. There isn't any class 3 or other that some other towns might have. Cambridge is quite unique in that area, and Waipa actually has quite an extensive amount already of elite 1 and 2 soils, more so than probably any other district in New Zealand, actually.
And if we go back on those population reprojections that we had for the LTP, you know, the ones that we just had to incorporate because of the discussion with the audit. If you project that increase that's in that revised projection through for 30 years, the projection for Cambridge is going to be absolutely phenomenal. And it's going to be well beyond what our current capacity is. Am I right in that? I mean, I'm sure you've taken those projections through for 30 years.
Yeah, and I think those are not projections that I'm intimately aware of. I know that certainly the requirement will be that the 30-year growth relates to the high targets plus a 20% contingency.
Yeah. But my understanding was those projections, he came through and made a distinction between the normally resident and the actual count. And actually even the count at the census time, wasn't it 2,000 greater for Waipa?
I just don't have that detail, Roger, and I don't have Tony here to answer those questions. And I think that's probably more specifically related to him. But I guess the key point here is that we do have to enable these provision for the expansion of our towns for 30 years out. And and have these targets here, and how we do that and achieve that is going to be the key, particularly in relation to the MPS, high quality soils, that we need to make sure there's no barriers there to allow us to achieve these directives, if that's whether it's for our LTP and growth targets or under these package 4.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act, isn't it? You know, and you can't create new highly productive land. You know. Anyway, Claire.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to speak to 2 points, which was the rural-urban boundary and then mixed-use zoning, or the 30 years and the cost of providing, for that. So I thought your point, Peter, that the reason we have those boundaries is because we're demonstrating where it would be possible to connect to network services provided by the council, because I think the policy makers in Wellington don't appreciate that. And I think that should be emphasised, that that's the reason for that boundary. Because it's all very well to say, oh, yeah, we're not going to have those limits anymore, but is that going to be workable if you can't connect to those network services, And the second point is around the mixed use zoning, and it's tied to the cost of providing that infrastructure that enables the growth, because council does need to have really good ways of recovering those costs in a way that means that we can still operate really effectively. I understand that mixed use zoning provides a good way of recovering a lot of those costs. There's a movement over in the US called Strong Towns. You might be aware of it. They did some analysis work and they said mixed use zoning is probably the best way to do it. But I don't know if that applies to New Zealand, but I certainly around the need to be able to recover those costs so that, it's not a burden that then constrains council from doing up all their other stuff, which is kind of like, I feel like we're getting to that point here in Waipara at the moment. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So the distinction between the urban rural and expanding into the rural, particularly if it's something that gets promoted privately, is the concept of growth pays for growth that the government's telling us about. So I think that there would be an expectation that if private people were wanting to advance ahead of our program growth, that they would be responsible for anything that's needed to upgrade the infrastructure. As far as the mixed use zoning goes, I agree. I think it brings in an interesting thing to think about. It will represent quite a significant change in how our neighbourhoods are, particularly our residential neighbourhoods. And I am aware of the Strong Town that you talked about, and it certainly wasn't. It was very targeted for as to where mixed zoning took place, not something that covered wide-ranging areas, but certainly will form part of our spatial planning work.
Philip.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys, for the report today. Sort of carries on from what Claire was saying. What's in it for, what are the benefits for our ratepayers? And main question is, what's the cost? You get all these changes and there's all these, and it's being more expensive for our ratepayers and communities. So what's the real benefits in the short answer? And is there going to be extra costs for them?
The benefits will supposedly be that they're able to do more things easier without going through a consent process, which has that's probably the key messaging coming out of it. Whether or not that ultimately results, we don't yet know. The costs of growth will continue. What we're experiencing now will continue. It's a matter of what tools is the government going to give us to increase or change the ways that growth can be funded.
I think importantly, just in terms of costs, we made the point that there's no impact in terms of having to change the district plan as a result of these national directions. there will be, I'd imagine, when the phase 3 new piece of legislation comes through and giving effect to some of these requirements and of course the legislation. So that's a good win. I think the government's sort of taken that on board. They don't want to impose costs for councils going through plan changes. But if you look at some other issues, the downsides, well, is it a cost or an effect on amenity if you put another higher tower? Because, for example, cell phone towers in the residential area on roads and residential areas going to be even higher. So what is the implications on that in terms of affected residents? It's not a physical cost, but it's an effect on amenity. So there are different implications associated with enabling more infrastructure to occur without consenting requirements.
Yeah, well, we've been involved in those a few times now, but in submissions there, we've got very little submissions from long-term plan and water and things like that compared to, say, the quarry out at Newcombe Road. How is it open yet, the submissions now? I mean, I haven't heard about it. I must have missed something or something. I haven't heard about it up until today. So if I haven't heard about it, which might be my error, will the community, how are they going to know about it?
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So no, this is a next step. So this is just a submissions to government, it's not a local council requirement for submission. So what we've said here is the packages 1 to 3 sort of highlighted. We've got to lodge submissions to government by the 27th of July. We've got under extreme timeframe constraints here. So we would have liked to elicit more feedback from you in relation to this. If you do have any comments in relation to the package of information that's available, let us know. We'll be pulling that together from a staff perspective and then to be approved and lodged by the Chief Executive under the delegated authority of the Mayor. And then the final submissions will be formally reported back to the next meeting of the SPMP committee. And for package 4, we do have a little bit more time, which is really heartening, and that we can bring that submission and have more of a discussion about what that submission content might look like at the meeting of the SPMP on the prior to being lodged on the 17th of August. So that's our plan for going forward. So I welcome any comments in that respect.
Sorry, I missed. So that's Waipa District Council putting a submission on behalf of the community. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. Okay, gotcha.
Can I just ask, and it's probably a little bit of a political question, but is there a sense amongst your colleagues in the sector that blockages in consenting in the past, which have been rather unreasonable and litigious, have meant that we've kind of got this almost pendulum swing back to a wildly liberalised scheme? And is there a sense that some areas or districts, and I kind of put Waipa in this category, that has had some really sound planning, 2050 is an example of that, Ahuaki another one. Is there a sense that perhaps the good councils, for want of a better description, are almost going to be unfairly kind of impacted by this wild liberalisation on account of the less lower performing councils, if you like, in terms of that planned development and provision of developable land?
I don't think that there's that sort of sense.
Okay, good.
I think that particularly from a developer's perspective, their requirement to have to interact with council is something that they don't like, regardless of how good the council is to deal with.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of the disquiet about RMA processes is coming from. Whether or not it's warranted is another matter.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks for that. Roger.
Just following on from that, I'd just like to say that, we have enabled significant government infrastructure, but it's just not funded. For example, the C2 growth area for the primary school, it's already been designated, went through pretty easily as a process. There's just no funding for it. The Southern Links designation already in place, no funding for it. So some of those key pieces of public infrastructure have gone through. We've got significant areas available for housing for MHUD in Cambridge North, but there's just no funding that's come from government to implement. So a lot of stuff is enabled to occur. And from my perspective, we do pretty well in terms of the process side of things too, in terms of notification. A lot of the information and consenting goes through non-notified and reasonably quickly. So don't see too many issues from our perspective in that regard. It's just that the government wants even more housing. We do have an issue of affordability issues, obviously. That's probably our key issue for Waipa. So, and the government's response is actually create more housing to try and reduce the cost of that.
And interestingly, the Minister Bishop, when we last met through our Future Proof meet with him, he indicated that he and Minister Stanford had been having a lot of discussions around trying to work up a different way of funding those critical pieces of infrastructure such as schools and medical facilities. And they were looking at developing a better framework for engaging with the local government so as to ensure that there was greater alignment in that investment. So that was promising, but I'm yet to see what that actually will look like on the ground. Roger.
Yeah, just looking at the longer term view, they've got some dated deadlines in there. So these changes are going to happen, and they're going to happen, probably within this year, or at least before the next government election comes in. We have, I think, a requirement that our district plan is up for review within the next number of years. I'm unsure exactly how many, but perception is 3 or 4 years we've got to do that. Would we, because of the fact that we're going to get a lot of pressure placed upon us, and especially if we continue as a tier 1, are we going to have to intentionally review Waipa 2050 and have a new district growth strategy?
So if I can start off.
Sorry, Pete. I'll just comment on that. It's really important that we do review that Waipa 2050 strategy. It is scheduled for this financial year to be refreshed. It's in the Kirsty's team, so Kirsty might have some more comment on that. But it provides a platform for the new regional spatial strategy and for the new regional combined district plan that will need to be produced. I don't anticipate any work being done on that new regional plan until 2027, and that is actually when our Waipa district plan is due for review as well. So we do need to have a conversation about, how much money, time, resource we do put in terms of further plan change work on our district plan, given we're going to have to pull together some document for the regional planning side of things. But Kirsty might have some further observations around on the Waipa 2050 review.
Thanks, Wayne. Not a lot to add. We've got budget and work program provides for the commencement of the review of Waipa 2050 now. So that work will be led by the strategy team. David Topman will have a key role in that. Just with regard to the regional spatial plan, as mentioned earlier, when the team from Waikato Regional Council presented on climate change, that work is underway, and with a small group of staff from partner councils, and Waipa does have a seat at the table in putting into the development of that spatial plan.
So, I'm really pleased, because what's coming out from there will have a lot of impact on a review of Waipa 2050, won't it? Yeah.
And in terms of when all this comes into play, the national direction changes will come into play end of this year. They'll be gazetted and will take immediate legal effect. And the bill itself is expected at the end of this year as well. So.
And what kind of discussion will we have in terms of our position on continuing or not continuing as a tier 1 district? Or tier 1 towns within the district?
This is our opportunity now as part of the submission process, particularly on package 4.
So we'll bring that back to the SPMP committee. We just have extra time on package 4. So we'll have that, we can have that further discussion. Council staff will give that a little bit more thought about the pros and cons associated with that. And then we'll bring that forward as part of that committee item. So that's an opportunity there.
Thanks, gentlemen. I'm just mindful of the time and the fact that we're eating into a wee break. But yeah, really comprehensive and critical piece of reform, I guess, that is ever evolving, but we need to be across in quite significant detail. So look forward to that coming back to SPMP in due course. Thanks, gentlemen. And I think we'll break now for our morning tea and come back. Let's give ourselves a few more minutes. So can we kick off at 11, if that's all right? Actually, 11. I'm sure we can gobble down. 11. Right. Welcome back, people. Let's crack on with our agenda here in terms of our workshops and briefings today. We obviously have Carl and Sharon there with us, along with Carl over there, the Carl. And you're talking to us today about the water service delivery plan. So the floor is yours. Been looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you. We have some slides, which hopefully will come up, which we will flick through reasonably quickly. And then the main purpose of this is to discuss the content or any questions on the content of the water services delivery plan and the process from here. I guess as a critical piece of introduction, the water services delivery plan you've got in front of you has been developed based on the consulted on preferred model, which is Waikato Water Done Well, which is obviously subject to future decision making by council in late July. If that decision's not to proceed with that model, then obviously the plan will need to be updated before it's submitted to DIA. But timing dictates that we need to progress the document on the best information we have to date, and that's what has been done. I guess the other key piece of context is that we have been speaking to DIA in the background and agreed with them that the content that is demonstrates the future of the CCO is consistent across all of the shareholding councils that are also preparing aligned plans. So that has been developed jointly with those 6 councils and the Waikato Water Done Well program team. It is worded consistently in that manner. And the direction from DIA is that they would like to see that consistent so that they don't have to review 6 different plans that are basically saying the same thing in a different way. So we've tried to keep that as consistent. The purpose of the water services delivery plan is to allow the Secretary of Local Government to sign off our approach to water services delivery in the future. That's the purpose of it and the sole purpose of it. We have obviously been in long conversations, and DIA is well aware of the model that we are proposing and is supportive of that model, as we said in previous sessions. So we expect the process or level of review that they need to apply to our water services delivery plan to be much more limited than they might be applying to some other arrangements around the country that they have less confidence in. So I guess the content of the plan needs to be considered in that context. I'll just quickly flick through the rest of the slides that I haven't talked to. The plan has to be delivered by the 3rd of September. The intent is to deliver all of the shareholding council's plans together as one package once they've been certified by the respective CEOs, and which happens after they're adopted by the respective councils. Our intent is to deliver them in the middle of August, ahead of that 3rd of September deadline. And our expectation is DIA turns them around in a very short time frame. So for those that just need a bit of a refresher, the Water Services Delivery Plan is a one-off document. It's provided or required under the Preliminary Arrangements Act. As I said, its purpose is to demonstrate to DIA and the Secretary of Local Government that we've got a model that's financially sustainable, meets all of the requirements of that Act, and is delivering to the requirements of the district. It covers a couple of years that have already happened and the period up to 2034, so aligns with what would have been the LTP period. We have to show water, wastewater and stormwater, and obviously in our situation, the proposal is the water and wastewater is going to the CCO, so that's a combined view. And then the stormwater section just shows the council's stormwater operations delivered by council. Noting that our delivery mechanism is a contractual mechanism back to the CCO. Has to talk about consultation, as I said, has to be adopted by council. And then the CEO, i.e. Steph, has to certify that document in accordance with the requirements of the Act. So it's Steph who's putting her name on the line at the end of the day. And then the DIA will review them and recommend their approval, or ideally recommend their approval by the Secretary of Local Government, who I think is the CE of DIA. There's some content description there for those that have already looked at the document. That's probably telling you what you already know. I guess the key thing is, as noted in the next page, the content that's in blue is the content that's been provided or jointly developed by all of the 6 councils. Next page. Have we not covered anything on that page? Probably not. As I said, we're doing this on the proposed model, and Sharon's done all the work. I'm just presenting the outcomes.
Not quite.
And to be fair to Sharon, she's also been instrumental in coordinating the broader shareholding councils into developing the joint content as well. As I said, the blue content is the common content. The grey stuff is the notes, just to give you the context of what DIA is asking for. And that will be deleted. And there are sections, we've duplicated the sections at the end to allow us to deliver the requirement for the 3 waters showing the 2 different models. I've covered all that content. That's the detail. I guess just in regard to which is covered in the memo, the financials that are in the document that you've got are an updated set of consolidated financials for the CCO that are updated to reflect the fact that we now have 6 stage 2 shareholding councils transferring their business in, and that transfer arrangement is staggered over a 12-month period. So as opposed to the numbers that were in the consultation document, which was 7 councils and everyone coming in on day 1, which was how we'd modelled it previously. So there are some differences between the final set of numbers that are in the plan compared to what was in the consultation document. The biggest impact of those things is Taupo coming out, changes our minimum price path slightly in year 2 and 3. But importantly, 2 things. One is the price path that's shown in the document is the average price path for the CCO. In reality, there are provisions in the shareholders agreement, as you might have recalled from the last couple of meetings. There's provisions in the shareholders agreement that allow for ring fencing of costs and revenues for at least the initial period post transfer, which effectively means that the actual price path for any individual council is likely to be different to the average. And importantly, the efficiencies that the CCO generates pay off any establishment and additional operating costs reasonably quickly within the forecast period. And so for any individual council, the actual price path that customers expect will be, or should be, less than what is in the alternative status quo, even without Taupo. Hopefully I've explained that reasonably clearly. It's a little bit complicated. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take those. And then next steps and timelines. So we are intending to, subject to any conversation we have today, send the draft water services delivery plan to DIA so that they can confirm that they are happy with it in advance of formal submission, and ideally in advance of the meeting at the end of July for you to approve it. The timing of the meetings in late July is subject to timings of some LTP things, but those are indicatively we're in late July. We will be making a decision about our final option. We will adopt the water services delivery plan, assuming you're happy with it. And then subsequent to that, and making sure that they will align across all the councils, Steph will certify that on behalf of Waipa. And then, as I said, in mid-August, our intent is to submit the package of 6 consistent water services delivery plans to DIA. And my personal expectation is that DIA turns that around very quickly subsequent to that submission. And I think that is the end of our slides. So open to you.
Yeah, any questions here for Carl or Sharon? Claire?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, yeah, what a huge amount of work, and total respect for Sharon and other people that have managed to put it together. Yeah, wow. It was really good to see the numbers actually, and I just wanted to check with you that it is going to be a publicly available document, isn't it? Because, you know, we had hearings yesterday about the level of detail that was supposedly missing from public consultation about it, but this information can be accessed, once it's adopted, I presume, by the public?
Yeah, our understanding is that DIA intends to publish all water services delivery plans at a point in the future. I'm not 100% sure on the timing of that. It may be after they've signed off all of the water services delivery plans. So it may be sort of, 3 to 4 months later. But I don't see any reason why the council couldn't choose to make their water services delivery plan public if they choose to do that.
Yeah, and look, I got a lot of comfort from the modelling that's in there that shows those trends over time. Obviously, it does also indicate that it's a good choice for Waipa to be considering the CCO, because if we weren't in that group, I suppose, arrangement, that we would certainly be facing more affordability challenges than what are there. Yeah, and just lastly, I just wanted to double check about the getting it approved on time. Yeah, that the risk of not getting it across the line by that deadline is diminishing as we speak, I hope. You mentioned that you're feeling pretty confident that once you've got it all signed off, that, well, in fact, it sounds like you're already in discussions with DIA, so that dialogue's, giving you reassurance that you're on the right track and it's going to be received favourably.
Yeah, correct. So our intent is to have DIA do an initial review prior to your final adoption meeting. So that will tell us whether we've missed anything important or said something that they don't want to, that isn't part of their decision-making process. So by the time you adopt the document, we should have that assurance. We have had a verbal conversation with LGFA, with DIA in the room, and they are comfortable with the way the numbers are shaping out from a lending perspective, which will provide DIA a lot of confidence. And as I said, the preferred timing is to submit all 6 shareholding councils documents together, but our fallback position would be Waipa will submit ahead of the deadline. And I see no, subject to the final decision of council, I see no reason why we shouldn't be well ahead of the 3rd of September.
Roger.
Yeah, no, I just share Claire's point there. I mean, we're getting closer and closer to September, are we not? And it's down to being a number of weeks rather than months. So that's good to hear that you're on track for that. And I think one of the things that came out over the last couple of days as we were doing the submissions is the fact that we didn't really know what the impact of Taupo not being party or the 7th member would have on the feasibility, and the new figures that have come out in this and this is the first time that we've seen these, gives us the confidence that the feasibility of the new entity is there. And so that removes that little bit of a question mark that we had. So that's good.
Steph. Just to your point, Roger, I think it's really important. I was chatting with Carl this morning about it, is that as a significant merger of complex businesses, it's a financial model, and the parameters are really important that you understand that you've set as councils for this work in terms of it averaging a lower price path than what would have been in the LTP. That debt and revenue are ring fenced for each council in the initial in the early days of the CCO. Carl, please stop me if I'm wrong in any of this, and probably I should have deferred to you to answer to make this point, but that those are the trajectories. We have a very good opportunity in our statement of expectations to be very clear about what we're looking for on a range of matters. But what I hear from you too is you're expecting our financial modelers to continually update that model. This is a significant business, and over time, over the next couple of years, that model will constantly evolve, and we expect it to be, because we expect fine tuning of it all the way through to know exactly where we're at and forecasting variances, any of that, and then to be reported back to the shareholders. So I've got confidence, and what you're seeing today, as you say, Roger, is that our financial modelling team are doing that work as it evolves, and the meetings that Carl has been involved with LGFA, making sure that the business environment we're in, including the lending environment, we're taking to account, and we are adjusting and making sure that the proposal we have is right on point at any point in time to the best of our ability. Did I miss anything out of that, Carl?
Only that in 2027, the CCO has to prepare a water services delivery strategy, which sets out their 10-year view. So that will be the next formal document that establishes an updated set of costs and revenue forecasts and prices and all that sort of thing, and will be part of responding to the statement of expectation. But in the meantime, there will be updates and less formal documentation.
Can I come in with another comment as well? And one of the feedbacks that we have is where the customer interface is going to occur. And I'm taking it from here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the customer interface will continue through the existing local authorities.
That's certainly correct on day one. So
yes,
the intent is that the key customer interfaces, which are billing and call centre and those type of communication mechanisms, will continue through each district council. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the intention for that to continue for the first, how long?
I can't really give you a definitive time frame, Roger, but until the CCO is prepared to centralise those functions and capable of doing that without disrupting customer service. So it would be post the transition of all 6 councils, which is into at least FY28. Yeah, so at least a couple of years.
Yeah, since Roger's asked another question. Well, in fact, I thought this was a really important point because I did raise a few questions about the algorithms, and so I met with Carl and Sharon earlier and just iron those out and understand that they're sort of a standard model that DI are wanting to apply. But through that, the point was made that there is a significant benefit to Waipa with the CCO model because of the financial parameters that apply compared to just a standalone council, and that's how DC revenue is accounted for. And so that hasn't actually come out very much before in our work. And I think, Carl, it'd be really good if you just emphasise that and what benefit that has for Waipa and the way we're managing our finances.
Yeah, sure. So the way the LGFA proposed debt covenants work is that we have a multi-council owned CCO that has more than 50,000 customers, which our CCO will do, assuming all 6 councils are in. Then the when calculating the covenants, the revenue number includes 75% of current and forecast development contributions, as opposed to the standard council debt covenants, where you have to exclude development contributions when calculating things like debt to revenue. So that's a significant advantage in terms of the ability to borrow, which means you can spread your costs over a longer period of time effectively.
Fantastic. Any other questions of these two people in respect to this work? Yeah, great milestone to sort of reach, right? And the day is fast approaching. No further questions? No, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, hey, look, I guess I'll just let you get on your way with it and take with you our thanks. I mean, it's a great, as intimated before, great deal of work behind this and has been ongoing for some time. So yeah, take our thanks and gratitude with you on that space.
Susan, can I just extend that? So Carl and Sharon are just doing a huge amount of work. We've all just come off our 7:30 Thursday call for CEs. But I just want to acknowledge Carl and EL in the background as well, because while all this is happening, of course, Carl's still delivering BAU. EL's team are still delivering everything that's expected of us in terms of continuous service with no interruption for our community while they're doing this work as well. So I just want to mahi to our team who may not be at the table, but are ensuring that both streams of work are continuing. So thank you, team.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. Awesome stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks,
Thank you.
Carl.
Have the rest of the day off.
She says tongue in cheek. I just like to see Carl.
Right, so look, we're running ahead of schedule now, which is most unlike us, but thankfully our next visitors who have come to see us from Mercury have arrived. They're in the house. Nice to see you, Lawrence and et al. Can I invite you to take the seat at the end of the room here. Welcome. I'll leave you, Lawrence, perhaps to do the introductions. Nice to see you, Lawrence, maybe familiar to a number of you around the table. You've been here before to discuss this, obviously, with us at a higher level. So really interested to get an update this morning from you all in respect to Mercury's Arapuni Hydro Dam remediation project. And really appreciate your time in keeping us appraised of the trajectory of that project. So I hand over to you and just invite you to press the button that says push on the microphone so that the little light will go green so that we can hear you loud and clear. And just as an FYI, these are being live streamed as well. So no swear words. Good morning. I'm sure you wouldn't anyway, but anyway, nice to see you.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Lawrence. I'm a communications advisor with Mercury. You may remember me from my time at the Waikato Times newspaper. I'm attached to the Arapuni project with Mercury. I have with me our project manager, Tom Newson, and our community engagement manager, Lainey Crystal. And I handle the media work with the project, and we aim to keep the local community out there informed of our work on this multi-year project, and that includes elected members around this table as well. But Tom has got a presentation to show you to give you an update on the project, so I'll hand it over to Tom now. Thank you.
Give you an update. I'm sure you passed through the site and you see some of the activity going on site. And we've got another piece of work coming up in the next 3 months called jet grouting. So I'm going to give you an overview of jet grouting. It's one of the design pieces of work we're wanting to use to help us with the fix of the dam. So the area of interest is pretty much in the photo shown there. It's on the left abutment. We've been doing some investigation and instrumentation work on that left abutment. and we've got a bit more work to do. So we were just, if we go to the next slide, we're going to just give an overview of some of the work that's been done, the jet grouting site trial, and the main works, the actual final treatment solution. A bit of an overview in terms of traffic management and how that will be managed during the jet grouting trial works, and a brief update on the community engagement to date. So if we go to the next slide, please. So a lot of this kind of goes without saying, but Mercury's a large dam owner operator. We have dam safety assurance program in place, and in 2016, on the back of a couple of earthquakes, the Seddon earthquake and East Cape earthquake, we saw some changes happening in the left abutment of the Arapuni Dam. Arapuni's got an interesting history. When it was built, 1927, filled. 1930, it leaked so badly it was dewatered, and they put in place some treatment on the left abutment. And from the studies that followed on from 2016, we've now concluded that some of those seepage remediation treatments put in place back in the 1930s have reached the end of their life, and we've got to put in place a modern seepage cutoff wall. So that's really what the project's about. There's no immediate safety risk. The station operation and generation continues throughout the program, like it did back in mid-2000s. Some of you will remember we worked on the dam then. So that's kind of the overview. If we jump to the next slide. Thank you. So in the geology is quite interesting in the left abutment for those who are interested. There's a section in the middle called powerhouse sediments. That's the soil we're looking to treat with the jet grouting trial. So we have to consolidate those sediments before we put in place the main fix. And we want to test that method of consolidation, which is called the jet grouting trial. So that arrow pointing down there into the left abutment, that's where the area of interest is, and running along to the head race bridge. So if we jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is an overview of the concept of fix. If you look in that cartoon there, you can kind of see the grey blob called the dam, and running along behind another darker shade of grey with the words cut off on it is the original cut-off wall. So that original cut-off wall was quite short, and it was constructed by hand in the day, pretty challenging to put in place. We want to build a new, longer and deeper cut-off wall, which is shown in the image there. And at the end of the cut-off wall, we've got the high-pressure gas main for the east coast of the North Island. So we've got a different type of treatment in that blue blob at the end. That will be a jet grouting piece of work. So the brown shading on the cut-off wall, that's the area that we want to jet grout or consolidate. It's in that sediment zone. And then when we come to build the main cut-off wall, it'll be formed with a series of smart or directionally drilled holes shown in the schematic on the right there. So we'll drill a pilot hole. It can be directionally drilled so we can steer it down, and then we'll enlarge a set of primary and secondary holes stitching up the cut-off wall. So that's the concept of fix at this stage. We're still working through the design process currently, just validating our understanding and engineering requirements. We jump to the next photo, please. Next slide. So there's been a bit of activity on site. We've been stabilising, doing all the enabling works down at the toe of the dam, making sure it's all safe for the workforce that will be there. And then we've completed 14 holes, investigation holes, where we've actually taken cores, extracted those cores, understood those, updated the geologic and the seepage model. Those holes have been re-instrumented. So, and we've got those logged real time. So there's about 105 instruments being logged all the time. So we can see if there's any sudden changes, we can respond to those. And thankfully we haven't had any, and we don't anticipate to have any. But what we did see when we were drilling was we were inducing changes in the abutments. So we've got a little bit more of rock slope stabilisation work to do. We've started completing the engineering assessment of the road, so tidying that up a little bit. We've got some pavement work, investigation works being completed, some geometric work being investigated as well, and some stabilisation of that detour route, which will help inform the design requirement that we need for the main works. Next slide, please. So this is again just showing you the area of interest. With the jet grouting, we drill down to the area of interest, and then as we're withdrawing the drill rig, we're rotating and mixing the existing soil and the sediment layer at sands and gravels, and we're mixing that with a grout material. So essentially forming a concrete column in that sediment layer. And the reason we want to consolidate those sediments is so that when we drill those large holes for the main cutoff wall, we don't get the hole collapsing into itself, and we limit any hydraulic connections in there. So it's a pretty important piece of work. The trial work we've got coming up, we've got a series of 9 holes to put in place, and some of them are single fluid, double fluid, and really what we're trying to understand is what's the radius that we can achieve actually doing that. And then we've got 4 verification techniques to see down and understand how effective that work is, so we can get to the point where we've got a repeatable, productive consolidation process that we can put in place for the main works. So if we just jump to the next slide, please. So this is the equipment. People will see it's about a 20-ton rig, so not huge, but it will be present. And there, the purple and red holes shown above are the trial holes. We've got the 9 trial holes. And you can see where they're enlarged down on the isometric view down on the right-hand side. That's the area we're looking to consolidate. The blue line is the high-pressure gas main with the easement in place. So we've been working really closely with Claris, making sure we've got the right monitoring systems in place for their asset and infrastructure. Next slide, please. So just wanted to give you an appreciation. This is our site layout plan for the trial. It looks a lot busier than it will be. But what we're looking to do in terms of traffic management is have it down to a single lane operation with manually controlled signals during that time. We've found that has worked quite well to date. We haven't had too many people causing problems down there. So that will be the proposal for there's 3 weeks of jet grouting, putting and mixing the cement and soil. There's about 28 days of concrete curing time. And then we, as part of that, we go back and do the verification. So all up, it's 3 months. The first month will be most intensive and look like this, where we have, ponds capturing product and people on site. So the second month will be a bit quieter with just a drill rig, and then the third month will be a smaller team again. So that's likely we'll start mobilising next week. We've been engaging with the community. If we go to the next slide. We've had 2 drop-in events in September and April. People are really understanding of why we need to do the work, which is very helpful. The big concern is around the detour and the effectiveness of the detour, people not suffering delays. So once we've completed the engineering assessment, the geometrics, we just need to understand what it looks like with 2 big Fonterra trucks passing each other, how that works. It will be single lane in the middle section like last time. Once we have that engineering information, that will then inform the engagement for that road closure. So we will be specifically targeting, if we need to, the freight industry. How can we try and offset the peaks? You know, can we travel at different times of day? Can we use other routes? So we'll get the engineering assessment done and then build the communication strategy on the back of that.
Can I ask a question? Hi, I'm Steph. I'm the Chief Executive, and thanks very much for this. I remember the one you came at the end of last year and gave us a heads up. So great to see the work that's going on, and great to hear about the testing that you've done and the results you're getting. Just to your most recent point about thinking about heavy traffic, could you keep us informed about what your modelling looks like as you're talking to the heavy truck or the heavy transport industry? Because there will be limited ways in which for that transport, limited other routes for that transport. It's highly likely some of that will come through Leamington and into our urban areas or our semi-urban areas. So it'd be great if you could keep us informed. I'm sure you intended to. So if we're expecting to see more traffic for a period of time, we can explain that to our community and be ready for that as well from a roading and a community perspective. And obviously we'll do all we can to help, because this is really important and you're an important partner for us as council. So, but just keen to know how that might have a ripple effect and how that might impact our communities. I'm sure South Waikato District are asking the same question. So
They are. I'm sorry, just to butt in here, but we're working quite closely with Brian Hudson, and he's been supplying us with traffic numbers. This is where we're getting most of our information from. So he's a fantastic asset for us. A shout out to Brian. Thanks very much.
Great.
So yeah, we're keeping him in the loop.
His boss is just over there,
Oh,
Evie
right.
Lisa. So she'll be delighted to hear that. But yeah, that's really good to hear. And I always, suppose it is happening, but it's always good to ask. So thanks. Yeah.
Yep. So we would anticipate, around September, we'd be back in touch going through the detail and agreeing the way forward. So if we just jump to the next slide, this is just the indicative milestones. So we've got the jet routing trials I talked about running through July, August, and being finished around September. At the same time, we've got a drill rig that will be lowered to the bottom of the dam, and we will commence some drilling at the bottom of the dam. And that will conclude all the investigation work. And we'll be then into, hopefully have the completed design for the main works, be going through the process of finalising what that looks like, pricing that and getting ready for construction from 2026 onwards. So, and currently it's in the range it's in the range of 18 to 26 months, but as we get the detail and we're able to sort of schedule the productivities, we'll be able to give you more certainty around that. So, and one of the things we're looking at is, once we get to a steady state production on a day shift, we'll then introduce a night shift, provided we can stay within all the technical requirements of noise and light and other things to get in, get the fix done and get out again. So,
And in the entire life of the dams, it's actually a reasonably short amount of time, right?
Yeah, and it hopefully should be good for another few decades at least. Yeah. So that's really the end of the update. If there's any questions.
Yeah, fascinating. Questions? Marcus, did you have one?
it's been fascinating being able to go and have a look at the Karapiro Dam and the upgrades happening there. Will we get the chance to have a look at Arapuni and see what's happening? Because I like going to the powerhouse and looking at the dam would be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, we're definitely talking about scheduling open day during the fix. And yeah, it's highly likely it's going to be the centenary of the dam in 2027 as well. So it'd be quite nice to tie the two things together if we can. Yep.
Any other questions? Philip?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for the presentation and the heads up and everything like that. That's a long gap, 18 months to 26 years, but 26 months, but yeah, that's just how, so that'll be closed the entire time. It won't be open in the evenings or weekends or anything like that?
No, during the main works, when we build the new cut-off wall, we'll need closure there. We're still looking at ways of routing the pedestrians and cyclists across the dam. Obviously, we want to keep them separated from the detour traffic on the Powerhouse Road. So just working through.
Probably won't be many cyclists going across the dam, would they? Because the river trail's on the eastern side of the river.
Yeah, which is the single lane section. And we're just a little bit concerned about mixing cyclists and heavy trucks going up that existing Powerhouse Road. So just looking at that presently as part of the engineering assessment.
And the Karapiro Dam, the opening of that, August the 15th, I think I heard, but.
Who told you that? But yes, that's kind of the worst kept secret. I think I might have made an announcement at the Lake Users meeting in Karapiro. So that's the date that we're aiming to get the road fully open again. So the Karapiro residents are pretty keen to see that happen.
I'm one of those.
Bruce?
The instrument, the monitoring instrumentation you're putting in at the moment, is that just for the work or does it stay there just for future?
It will stay there for future. So yeah, part of it, they put some in 2021, and when we construct the new cut-off wall, some of that will be damaged. And so we're putting in a new set of instrumentation, transferring the baseline across, and then we'll carry that on forward. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the best.
Yeah, well outside of my area of expertise and competence. So yeah, great to see that you've got some really very detailed plans over a very prolonged period, and you're really contemplating the impact on a broader sort of sub-regional basis. So welcome that ongoing engagement on that respect. So thank you. Thank you. And thanks for taking your time to come and keep us abreast of it all. Philip, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Just real, how are the other dams looking upstream? You got future projects, work needs on those?
Yeah, with time came knowledge, and modern equipment actually made it a lot easier to construct some of the dams. But yeah, there's an ongoing dam safety assurance program, 5-yearly comprehensive review of the structures. Taupo Gates, you would have heard there's a program of work underway on Taupo Gates that was a 1940 structure. So yeah, all the dams go through that sort of regular assessment. Seismic loads keep going up, so flood resilience keeps increasing. So we have to keep considering that in context of the existing assets.
You're welcome to build another dam on the outskirts of Cambridge for a new bridge. You're welcome to do that and help our ratepayers.
I'll mention that to the chief exec.
Right. Thank you. Lani, did you want something to add there? Just double lane. We'll take that into consideration. There is one thing that we thought we'd mention too. It's not anything to do with the Arapuni project per se, but we've just announced a partnership with Finlay Park, where they've presented us. We've been working with Finlay Park for many years,
and Ian and Gus and the team out there. And they presented us with a proposal a few weeks back, and we've accepted that proposal and are now working with them to upgrade their Karapiro Museum that they've got out there. And also they've got a lot of videos, a lot of photos that need updating. And they also have quite a good model of the the old Hora power station. So it's seen better days. That structure needs to be kind of removed and sort of replaced, where kids have been scratching things into the perspex and what have you. And so Gus has asked for a bit of money to help him out to continue to teach students that go through there, and to make things like that a little bit more interactive. So yeah, we're very proud to partner with Finlay Park. So yeah, we'll keep you updated on how that goes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And that brings to a conclusion our day's work here in respect of workshops and briefings.